There is a difference between someone who is working toward a new financial reality and someone who has genuinely become the version of themselves that already lives there. And that difference, as subtle as it can sound on the surface, is everything. Most people in the manifestation space are working toward. They are applying techniques, building new habits, shifting their mindset, taking inspired action, all of it pointed at a financial destination somewhere ahead of them that they have not yet reached. And there is real value in that work. But here is the diagnosis that Dispenza's book made undeniable for me, and the one that ties together everything we have explored across this entire series. As long as you are moving towards something, you are still in separation from it. You are still, on some fundamental level, someone who does not yet have it, working hard, with genuine intention, to eventually get there. And that orientation, however sincere, however disciplined, tends to produce slow, incremental movement rather than the kind of genuine, identity-level shift that reorganizes your entire financial reality around a new version of you. A quantum leap, in the framework Dispenza describes, is not a gradual progression. It is not the accumulation of enough small steps that you eventually arrive somewhere new. It is a genuine discontinuity, a real, felt, internal shift from one state of being to another, without necessarily passing through every intermediate step in between. One moment you are the version of yourself defined by a particular financial identity. And then, through a specific internal shift, you are genuinely someone else, someone for whom the old financial ceiling simply no longer applies, because it belonged to a version of you that no longer exists. I know that can sound abstract, so let me ground it in something real from my own experience. In the first 2 videos of this series, we talked about the personality that keeps producing financial reality, the repeating loop of thinking, acting, and feeling that reproduces the same outcome regardless of strategy. And we talked about the body that lives in the past, the physiological patterns encoded by old financial wounds that keep pulling present behavior back toward familiar territory. Both of those pieces were real in my own life, and I worked with both of them consistently and seriously for a meaningful period of time. But there came a moment, and I want to be clear that it felt like a moment, not a gradual fade, where something genuinely shifted. Not the circumstances first, not the bank account first. Something inside. A real, palpable sense that the version of me who had been defined by a particular financial story had genuinely ended, and that I was, in a way that felt both quiet and completely certain, someone different now. The external reorganization followed that internal shift. Not instantly, not without the practical work still needing to happen, but with a quality of momentum and alignment that felt qualitatively different from everything I had experienced before, as though the circumstances were now moving toward me rather than me straining toward them. By the end of this video, I am going to tell you exactly what that moment looked and felt like from the inside, and what specifically made it possible after years of genuine effort that had moved things, but had not yet produced that kind of discontinuous leap. But before we get there, I want to make sure you understand the real distinction between trying to change and genuinely becoming, because this is the conceptual piece that everything else in this final video depends on, and it is the piece most people in the financial transformation space never quite articulate clearly enough to be genuinely useful. This is part 3 and the final video of our series on breaking the habit of being yourself. If you have not watched parts 1 and 2 yet, go back and start from the beginning. Each video builds directly on what came before, and this final piece will land much more powerfully if you have the full foundation underneath it. If you are new here, hit subscribe and grab the free PDF on equal hours and their meanings linked in the description. Let's bring this series home. So let's talk about the real difference between trying to change and genuinely becoming, because this distinction is more precise and more practically important than it might initially sound. Trying to change operates from the outside in. You identify a financial result you want, and you work backward from it, finding the strategies, the behaviors, the mindset shifts that seem most likely to produce that result. You apply them consistently, you monitor your progress, you adjust when things are not working. This is not wrong. It is actually how most intelligent, motivated people approach financial transformation. And it produces real movement. But here is what trying almost always leaves intact, underneath all of that disciplined external work. The identity of someone who does not yet have the thing they are working toward. Someone who is making their best effort to get there. Someone who is, by definition, still in the process of becoming rather than already being. And that underlying identity, however quietly, however invisibly, continues to shape every decision, every behavior, every physiological response, in ways that tend to reproduce a version of the old financial reality even as the surface-level strategy changes around it. Becoming operates completely differently. It does not start with the desired result and work backward. It starts with the identity of the person who already lives that result and works forward from there. Not as a performance, not as a pretense, but as a genuine, internally felt shift in who you understand yourself to be. Dispenza is very clear about why this distinction matters so much at the neurological level. When you are trying to get somewhere, the brain is still operating from the neural networks associated with your current identity, the well-worn pathways built through years of thinking, acting, and feeling as the version of you that exists right now. New strategies and new behaviors can build new pathways alongside those old ones, but the old ones remain dominant as long as the underlying identity has not actually changed. When you genuinely become a new version of yourself, when the internal shift is real enough that your sense of who you are has actually updated, the brain begins operating from a fundamentally different set of neural networks. The old pathways do not disappear, but they lose their dominance. And from that new neural foundation, the same external circumstances start producing genuinely different responses, different decisions, and ultimately different financial outcomes. I want to share what this distinction looked like in my own financial life, because I think the contrast makes it concrete in a way that abstract explanation alone does not quite capture. For years, I was trying, genuinely, consistently, intelligently trying. I was reading the right books, applying the right frameworks, doing the inner work with real seriousness, and things were moving slowly, incrementally in the right direction. But I was still, at every point in that process, someone working toward financial freedom rather than someone who simply was financially free in the way I most deeply wanted to be. The trying version of me would make a financial decision and then monitor it anxiously, scanning for confirmation that it had been the right call. The trying version of me would enter a significant financial conversation, already calculating the gap between where I was and where I wanted to be. The trying version of me would do the visualization, feel the elevated emotion for a period, and then drift back, almost without noticing, to the familiar identity underneath. None of that was failure. It was the honest experience of someone genuinely in process, but it was not the quantum leap, and, deep down, I knew the difference. The becoming shift, when it finally happened, did not feel like trying harder. It felt like something releasing, like the effort of maintaining the old identity. The constant low-level strain of being someone still in the gap simply stopped. And what remained, without that strain, was something quieter and more settled. A sense of already being, rather than still working toward. That shift did not come from nowhere. There were specific internal conditions that made it possible, conditions that I want to walk you through precisely, because I think they are reproducible, and I think understanding them is the most practically valuable thing I can offer you in this final part of our series. So what actually creates the internal conditions for a genuine quantum leap? Because this is where I think most conversations about identity shifting and becoming stay frustratingly vague, talking about elevated states and new identities without ever getting specific enough to be genuinely useful. Dispenza identifies two elements that need to come together simultaneously for a real identity level shift to occur, not one or the other. Both, at the same time, sustained with enough consistency that the brain and body genuinely begin to update their dominant pattern. The first element is clear intention. Not a vague wish or a general direction, but a specific, precise sense of who you are becoming and what that version of yourself actually feels like from the inside. Not what they have, not what their bank account looks like, not what their life circumstances are, but who they are, how they carry themselves, how they make decisions, how they relate to money, to opportunity, to their own worth. The more specific and embodied this picture is, the more the brain has something concrete to begin building new neural networks around. The second element, and this is the one most people underestimate, is elevated emotion. Not positive thinking. Not forcing a smile over genuine anxiety. Actual, physiologically real elevated emotion. Gratitude that is felt in the body, not just understood intellectually. Genuine excitement, real joy, authentic love, emotions that, according to Dispenza's research, carry a sufficiently high energetic frequency to actually signal the body that the new identity is already real, rather than still somewhere in the future. And here is why both elements need to be present simultaneously. Intention without elevated emotion is just a thought, a new idea sitting on top of the old neural foundation, without the energetic signal strong enough to actually begin rewiring it. Elevated emotion without clear intention is just a good feeling, pleasant, beneficial for the nervous system, but not directed precisely enough to build a specific new identity around. Together, clear intention and elevated emotion create what Dispenza describes as the optimal state for genuine neurological change. The brain, flooded with the chemical signature of elevated emotion while simultaneously holding a precise vision of a new identity, begins to fire new neural connections. And repeated consistently, not perfectly, not without the old patterns sometimes reasserting themselves, but consistently enough, those new connections begin to strengthen into genuine new neural pathways. I want to share an example from a client of mine because her experience illustrates this combination with real clarity. She had been working on her financial identity for a long time with genuine effort and real self-awareness. But when we looked at her practice closely, we found something important missing. Her intention was clear. She could describe precisely the financial version of herself she was building toward. But the emotional state she was generating in her practice was mostly calm and neutral. Peaceful, yes. Elevated, not quite. When she began deliberately cultivating genuine gratitude, not for the financial reality she wanted, but for specific, concrete things already present in her life that she had been moving past too quickly, something shifted in the quality of her practice. The same clear intention, now paired with a physiologically real elevated emotional state, started producing a different quality of internal experience. Less effortful, more genuinely felt. And over the following weeks, the external financial shifts that had been slow and incremental started moving with a different kind of momentum. This is also why consistency matters more than perfection in this process. You do not need to sustain the elevated state flawlessly every single day. What matters is returning to it consistently enough and catching yourself when you drift back into the old identity without judgment and gently returning again, that the new neural pattern gradually becomes more dominant than the old one. The mistake most people make is expecting the elevated state to feel natural immediately. It will not at first, because the old identity is still the most familiar thing the body knows. The elevated state will feel slightly unfamiliar, slightly effortful, slightly like you are reaching for something that is not quite yet automatic. And that slight unfamiliarity is actually the signal that you are building something genuinely new, rather than simply reinforcing what already exists. Stay with that unfamiliarity, return to it daily, let it gradually become the new familiar. And when it does, when the new identity starts to feel more natural than the old one, when the elevated state starts arriving more easily than the contracted one, that is when the quantum leap becomes possible. Because the body has finally learned a new prediction, a new emotional future to rehearse, a new version of you to expect. Which brings me to the moment I promised you at the very beginning of this series. The specific moment when my own quantum leap actually happened, and what it felt like from the inside. Before I tell you about that moment, I want to say something that I said in our last video, and that I think is worth repeating here at the close of this series. Everything I share on this channel comes from my own genuine journey. It is not a magic pill. It is not something that happens overnight or without real, consistent, sometimes uncomfortable effort. But with daily self-awareness and genuine practice, it happens. The only thing that guarantees it will not happen is consuming content without ever applying what you learn. Knowledge without application is just weight you carry without benefit, and many of us are already carrying enough of that. If limiting beliefs are something you want to explore more deeply, and I think they connect directly to everything we have covered in this series, let me know in the comments. Just write limiting beliefs, and I will know that conversation is worth bringing to you. Now, the moment. It happened on an ordinary morning. Not during a meditation, not at the peak of a particularly powerful visualization session, not in a moment of external triumph that somehow unlocked something internal. Just an ordinary morning, sitting quietly before the day began. I had been practicing consistently the deliberate interruption of old physiological patterns we talked about in the last video, the clear intention paired with genuine elevated emotion we covered in this one, for long enough that the practice had started to feel less like effort and more like returning to something familiar. The new identity was still being built. But it had been built enough that it had started to feel more natural than the old one. And on that particular morning, something simply shifted. The best way I can describe it is that the gap closed. Not gradually, not incrementally, but in a single quiet moment of internal recognition that felt less like arriving somewhere new and more like remembering something that had always been true. The financial version of myself I had been working towards stopped feeling like a destination and started feeling like a description. This is who I am, not who I am becoming. Who I am now, already. There was no dramatic external event accompanying that moment. No sudden windfall, no phone call with life-changing news, no external confirmation that anything had shifted. Just a quiet, completely certain internal recognition that the old version of me, the one defined by a particular financial story, a particular set of limitations, a particular relationship with money and worth and what was possible, had genuinely ended. And that I was, without question or effort or performance, someone different now. What followed that moment was not magic. The practical work of building financial freedom still needed to happen. Decisions still needed to be made, relationships still needed to be built, opportunities still needed to be pursued. But all of that practical work now happened from a fundamentally different internal foundation. And the quality of what came toward me, the opportunities that appeared, the conversations that opened, the financial momentum that began building, felt qualitatively different from anything that had come before. Not because the external world had changed first, because I had. This is what Dispenza's book ultimately points toward, and what I hope this entire series has made real for you in a way that goes beyond theory. Breaking the habit of being yourself is not about self-improvement layered on top of an unchanged identity. It is about genuinely ending one version of yourself with compassion, with gratitude for what that version carried and survived and built, and stepping fully and without reservation into the next one. Your financial ceiling was never a fixed fact about what was possible for you. It was a habit, a deeply encoded, physiologically reinforced, personality-level habit of being a particular version of yourself. And habits, however old and however stubborn, can be broken. Thank you for being with me across all 3 videos of this series. If you have not watched parts 1 and 2 yet, they are on the end screen. Go back and watch them in order because each one builds the foundation for the next. And if this series brought you something real, share it with someone who needs it. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this video and until the end of this series. It truly means the world to me, and I hope these conversations brought you something real, something you can carry with you starting today. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel. We have so much more to explore together, and if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. You never know whose life you might change with a single video. The books that have shaped my journey and that I personally recommend are all linked in the description below. Go check them out. They are worth every page. And don't forget, there is a free PDF in the description on how to interpret equal hours and their meanings. Grab yours. It is completely free, and it might just change the way you see the signs the universe has been sending you all along. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.